Hello and welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. This is Josh. I'm joined as always by Sam, and we have a lot to get through today. We got the Daytona 500, we got two Formula E races, and we also have some F1 news to get to, but we'll start off with that Daytona 500 where William Byron won after he avoided a last lap pileup going into turn 3, and he held off Tyler Reddick there to the finish as they let them go back to the start-finish line under green. Did not throw the yellow flag there, but he's the first back-to-back winner of the Daytona 500 since Denny Hamlin in 2019 and 2020. The seas kind of just split there for Byron, and he found his way through and got his second title.
Yeah, I mean, he played his cards right, and sometimes that's all you can do, honestly, in the Daytona 500, He could have, played his cards right and crashed out and finished 30th, or he could have ended up back in the winner's circle again, and luckily for him, the second thing happened. But, yeah, I mean, all day they looked like they had pace. We'll get into the Penske's a little bit later. It seemed like they had the fastest cars, but Hendrick also had some good performers out there and looked like they could have been the only ones to maybe put up a real challenge. It's a little bit of luck, a little bit of skill. It's kind of both these days at Daytona.
Yeah, I think that's something that is talked about a lot after this race especially, but I thought that, Byron, it's funny, I mentioned to you during the race that I thought he was kind of nowhere to be seen for the first half of it at least, but he comes out with the win still. A great performance from him, I think, despite the fact that he was so far not near the front necessarily for most of the race, just kind of lurking back there. But he does, manage to find a way there at the end, similar to last year, although he was running up a little bit closer to the front last year when there was that wreck going to the white flag there as well.
Yeah, it was an interesting kind of up and down race for him. He ended up with a pretty decent average running position, just over 11th, is one of the better ones in the field, obviously. But yeah, it was very up and down. I mean, there were times where he was kind of nowhere to be seen. But then there were also other times, like early in the race, he showed some pace and was towards the front of the pack. And that's just another Daytona thing we see. It's not a lot of cars kind of hold serve the entire day like Blaney and Cindric did for so long. Those two look to be far and ahead. They were far and ahead for most of the day. Sticking up there first and second, or at least up in that at the front of the lead pack. And even Joey Logano, he was a little more up and down the leaderboard, but pace-wise, you could tell he was up there as well. And not everybody's going to be like that at Daytona. Most of the field very up and down. You see guys all the way back in 30th, even further back, maybe at the start of the race, end up in the top 5 or 10. So, and vice versa. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought that he kind of just lurked right around that 11th position where his average running position was through the race, just right outside the top 10, not doing anything spectacular, but also not getting caught up in any of the wrecks or anything. So that's kind of what this super speedway style racing has come to nowadays, and he managed to perfect it now for 2 years in a row. But with the win, Byron joins a list of Bill Elliott, Dale Jr., Jimmy Johnson, Matt Kenseth, Sterling Marlin, and Michael Waltrip as two-time Daytona 500 champions. I just kind of want to get a read of what you think this does for Byron's legacy, or his eventual legacy in the sport. Obviously, he's still young and he still has a lot of time to do some great things, maybe win some championships and stuff, but where do you see a two-time Daytona 500 champion kind of putting him among the list of this generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's big for his legacy. I think, though, I think there's already starting to be a little bit of a conversation around this race, to put it simply, a luck versus skill thing, and was he lucky to win 2 Daytona 500s in a row, or did he put the car in the right place at the right time to succeed? I think a little bit of both is true. But yeah, I think it still is big for his legacy. This is still the biggest race in the calendar, and will be for the foreseeable future. And now you kind of see like two different career paths diverging. He could have that Denny Hamlin kind of career, maybe not. Denny's up over 50 wins now, so maybe he doesn't get that many, but a really solid career where this is sort of his defining achievement, like Denny's with the 3 500s. It's sort of his other than his overall win record, probably his biggest achievement. He could have that kind of career, and that'd be a really great career. But I think a championship, or even just like a season-long point, even if he doesn't win the official championship, even a regular season points championship or something like that might go a long way for his legacy at this point, sort of as a dominant driver outside of this race.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's huge for legacy when you think about what the Daytona 500 has meant throughout history. But looking at it now, we've had that conversation, or at least we're starting to have it, where the situation of luck versus skill is coming into play. I think it still is a pretty solid 50-50 mix at this moment. I think if we keep going in this direction, it might lean more towards a little bit of luck rather than skill. But I think there is something to be said for, you see the same guys kind of up near the front of superspeedway racing all the time. And, that takes skill to manage to have your car up near the front and have it in the right position at the right times. Then the luck comes into play of avoiding those accidents and making it through a possible last lap big one or something like that. Byron seems to be doing a pretty good job of it, and you see other guys as well doing a good job of it. So I think there is some skill to it, obviously, but there's also that side of luck, and that is going to affect the legacy of multiple-time Daytona 500 winners in the future. But right now, I think like you mentioned, it could, if he goes the way of a Denny Hamlin type career, it could be a very defining part of his career, having these two 500 championships.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be defining on some level regardless. It's just whether it's the first thing you mentioned about him, the centerpiece of his career or not. But yeah, just to get back to what you were saying about luck versus skill, I mean, I think it's clear that there's still a skill required in this race. You still got to put your car in position to win. You can't be back at the back of the pack, 25th, 30th, or whatnot, and expect that you're going to have some miraculous last lap win. You have to put yourself in that top 5, maybe even top 10. You got to be up there with a chance to win it. But yeah, I mean, like guys like Blaney and Cindric and Logano, and even like his teammate Chase Elliott was really good all day. Those guys have put themselves in good positions throughout the race. Kyle Busch too had a chance to win there towards the end before he got caught up in an accident. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of really threading the line right now, threading the needle between that luck versus skill conversation, I guess. Yeah,
I completely agree. Moving to that last lap, and NASCAR, they did end up letting them run to the line. I think that was a fantastic call from NASCAR. I know we want to see some consistency in that, and we did not see that with how they called the end of the duels with Eric Jones not winning that race because they called a caution just a few car lengths from the start-finish line. They gave that one to Austin Cindric in the end. And then this one happens all the way back in turn 3, and they let it run to the end. I would rather them lean on that side of things, especially at a super speedway track where it's so big that you don't have to worry about the guys coming right back to the scene of the accident in a pretty quick manner before they can get things kind of sorted out back there. There's plenty of time for Byron or whoever comes across the start-finish line first to slow down and not, make that wreck even worse. So I think that leaning towards that side of the right call is, the way to go, especially at a track of this size or even 1.5 miles or something like that. Short track might be a little different depending on, how big of the accident is and the size of the short track. But yeah, I think it was the right call here.
Yeah, I think NASCAR got it right here. I agree with you that I'd like to see some consistency. It's tough to judge two different wrecks against each other, let alone the hundreds or whatnot that we've had over the years. But when you look at it, I mean, like on this last lap incident, they're well down the backstretch. That's plenty of time for guys to slow down. Yeah, plenty of time, unless there is. Obviously, safety comes first. If there is an immediate safety concern, a guy goes up into the catch fence or
car on fire, or car split in half or something.
Yeah, exactly. If there's a major immediate safety precautions that need to be taken, then absolutely,
Yeah.
throw the caution flag. But in a crash like this, even though there were a lot of cars involved, there wasn't anything, on the scale of, like, say, Ryan Preece flipping over about 20 laps earlier. So I think in this case, NASCAR really made the right call. We'd all love to see consistency, but I think this is an especially a tough area to be consistent in.
Yeah.
And we've seen that across different series as well. NASCAR is really the only one we follow that really has this problem. I guess maybe some Indy ovals could too, but it's still, we always want to see consistency from officiating in motorsports, but oftentimes it's just not really possible.
Yeah, it is, every situation is different, so you have to take that into account as well, and it's not always going to be exactly the same call at exactly the same time. But in this case, I think that they made the right decision letting it go towards green, and I would like to see them lean a little bit more that way in the future, especially at these big races like the 500 where everyone tunes in and, you have your most viewership for the whole year at a time like that, and then you don't want it to end under a yellow. That's not like the exciting finish that you're looking for. And I just think that letting it lean towards this side, like you said, unless there's some immediate big safety risk, is the right call.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw, obviously it's dependent on track position too, where you're at on the track when the flag goes. I mean, we saw the Xfinity race. We didn't even really get a final lap, because the flag was thrown. But that was the right decision, in my opinion, because an accident that close to the start-finish line, if you've got cars everywhere and these guys are racing, hard to the finish, that's a real safety concern. So, yeah, I think it's just track position dependent, and, from there you have to judge the severity of the crash. But I think NASCAR got it right, on most of these this weekend at least.
Yeah, speaking of crashes, we'll get into the Joey Logano and Ricky Stenhouse crash here. That was one that has been highly debated online, I'd say. I tend to lean towards it's Logano's fault side of things. Just watching the overhead and onboard of Stenhouse, he was blocking really hard. It may be a little too hard at some parts, but also Logano tried to make that move just a few seconds prior, didn't make it work. Stenhouse blocked it off pretty well, aggressively, but pretty well. And then he just kept trying to go lower and lower and lower and make that move work when it just was never going to. And eventually he just ran out of real estate and then caused that big crash that also took out his teammate Ryan Blaney, who was in a great position to win. Two of the three Penske cars that I thought really had the best opportunity to win that race gone in one crash. Mostly because of, one of their faults, in my opinion. So that wasn't a great look, especially if you're a Ford and Penske fan. But I just think Logano just kind of got a little bit impatient, in my opinion. He could have waited. I think a move like that a few laps later on, you can, look at that and be like, yeah, he was trying to go for the win there. We're running out of time. But with 13 to go, in those top 2 or 3 rows, you still have a great chance to win. So I think it was a little bit early to make a move like that.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to both sides it, but I really think this is one of those times where I think both sides were a little bit at fault. Really both drivers kind of got overly aggressive given the fact that there was still about 20 laps left in the race. I think Stenhouse was a little late to throw that first block. Granted, it was a quick move by Joey. It was kind of tough to see it coming. But he was still very late down there. I mean, in another timeline, that causes a major accident, and that would be pretty squarely on Stenhouse. But I think by the same token, like you said, once that doesn't work, Logano continues to get overly aggressive.
Yeah.
And I think, I watched a Kyle Busch interview about the crash, and he pretty clearly thought it was Joey's fault. And he made the point that, there was no need for Joey to get so aggressive right there, with about 20 laps left. We talked about, and this is something Kyle said too, we talked about how Penske had the fastest cars all day and seemed like they were the team that was going to win this race. So there was really, I think Stenhouse, like I said, not a great first block and really could have caused some trouble. But by the same token, Joey tried to push the envelope a little bit too hard after he got blocked, when really there was no need to, because they had the best car on the day. And I think if he played it a little bit safer, he very easily could have won that race.
Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it too. Is Stenhouse, obviously he's making those aggressive blocks. It's pretty early on to make blocks like that, but he did block it pretty fairly in the end, and then Joey just kept trying to go lower and lower. It kind of seemed like he would move out of it for a minute and then dive back in. And I feel like he just couldn't make up his mind there on what to do. He had a run and just didn't really know what to do with it after it was blocked off the first time. I think that's just part of the super speedway thing, is just getting really impatient, and you get blocked by Stenhouse for 10, 20 laps at that point. You just want to get around him eventually. I hate to say that, it's Joey's fault of getting too impatient, because I think anybody would get impatient being, blocked and stuck behind like that for some time. But in that situation, Joey is an experienced enough guy to know that that's not the time to make that move, and that he could have waited probably another 10 laps or so to try and make a move like that stick.
Well, that's the point that I was going to make, is that, if it were a more inexperienced driver, who hadn't won this race, then I would get that a little bit more. But, Joey's won this race before. He's a multi-time champion, and he's a long-time veteran of the series at this point. Mm-hmm. So, you have to be able to exercise that patience, take your time, realize, maybe this isn't the moment, and try again at the next lap or a couple laps later. Like we said, they still had plenty of time. 20 laps is an eternity at Daytona, plenty of time to make it. When we saw guys go up and down, 5+ spots in one lap constantly throughout the race, there's plenty of time to make up ground even at the front. So, I think just as a veteran and as someone that's one of the most established drivers in the series, you kind of have to exercise a little more patience there. But I get what you're saying. Yeah,
well, that's the thing, is that's why we're not talking as much about the Cole Custer wreck on the last lap, is because he's been around the Cup Series for some years. I've been in Xfinity, but he's not, he doesn't have that pedigree, and he's not quite as experienced as Logano is. So, we kind of give him that free pass a little bit. Obviously, I don't know what he was doing on the last lap, but still, regardless, that's why I see a lot more people talking about this Joey one than the Cole Custer one, because I think we just, not that we expect more from Joey necessarily. I don't think all fans would say that, but I just think given his veteran status, you would expect more.
Well, and it's the time of the race too.
Exactly.
I think. Yeah, with 20 laps left, you have to exercise a little more patience. On the last lap, all bets are off, especially at Daytona. Yeah. Unless you just decide to turn it down on someone and crash them or for whatever reason,
Kind of what Cole Custer did a little bit, but
yeah, but I don't know. I don't think it was intentional.
No, it wasn't intentional.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Other than intentionally taking someone out, all bets are off on that last lap. You're going to be aggressive. You're going to make moves that you normally wouldn't make to try and win that race. It wasn't great, but I wouldn't, put too much. Yeah. I was going to say wouldn't put too much blame. It is, the blame does go to him, but it's not something that I discount him for, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's move to our personal top threes here for the Daytona 500. My number one has to be William Byron, obviously the winner of the event. I thought that he played the cards right, whether we agree with, how the racing is and how, it's going to turn out in the end. He obviously knows, what he's doing and made the right decisions for his race and to win the race in the end. And then in second, I had Jimmie Johnson coming in third place in the race. Kind of came out of nowhere, to be honest. Earlier last week, I had talked about how I thought Jimmy might retire at the end of this season. He's not doing full-time, obviously, anymore, but from still part-time racing. I still think that may be the case, but regardless, an incredible finish from Jimmie Johnson to bring it home in third in the legacy car. Obviously, equipment doesn't mean quite as much at a super speedway, but still a great performance from Jimmy, avoiding that wreck there at the end and skating through for a third. And then in my third in the personal top 3, I had Justin Allgaier finishing 9th for the Junior Motorsports Cup debut. I thought he did a great job this weekend, kept the car clean the entire time, made it through the duels, had good pace in qualifying too, and just played it really smart, I thought, throughout the entire race. You never saw him get into, too many of the accidents. He managed to skate his way through most of those, and I just thought that it was a good display from Allgaier and from Junior Motorsports on their Cup debut.
Yeah, I mean, I really think I think that's a good top 3. I think there are kind of 2 different ways you could go with this, because Daytona is so unique. You go with kind of how it ended up, or how they kind of ran all day.
Yeah.
So I kind of ran all day, and I have Byron first as well, just because he did run very well, and won the race as well. So you can't really discount him for that. But my second and third, I went with Cindric and Blaney, just because they were so dominant throughout the race, and obviously they both crash out, but neither crash was really their fault. So you can't put too much blame on them for that. They're in Penske's, but Cindric, had his average position on the day, I believe, was 5.72, which is like far and ahead the best in the field. And I believe Blaney was second at 9.14. So, we watched the whole race, and Logano led a lot of laps too, but he was a lot more up and down the field.
Mm-hmm.
Cindric and Blaney were very consistent leading the pack. And for Cindric too, you got to give some credit. Had a fantastic weekend overall.
Yeah.
Qualifying second and then winning his duel even when he didn't really have to. So, it was still a really good weekend for them, and they still did finish in the top 10. So, it's not like they finished 30th or something. They finished 7th and 8th respectively. So, and then I'll shout out Legacy as well.
Yeah.
Legacy Motor Club, just as a whole, with Jimmy coming in third and then John Hunter Nemechek coming in fifth, 2 top 5s, even at a super speedway where things are going to get a little mixed up, is still really, really impressive for them. And then Eric Jones was 12th as well, and kind of hung in there all day. He was right up there in the mix for most of it. So, even though he was the lowest finisher, he's still a solid day as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great call about Legacy. Your talk about the Fords kind of leans into my stinker of the weekend actually being those Fords, just because the fact that they had so much speed and they weren't able to capitalize on it for a race win. And I felt like a lot of those were due to accidents caused by them. You had Custer on the last lap. You had Logano, his accident that at least I feel like was mostly his fault. You could put some of that on Stenhouse as well. I'd probably say 75-25 on Logano in the end. But yeah, that's why, I just think that they had a great opportunity to win a 500 with all 3 of the Penske cars were up there the entire day. Like you mentioned, a big shout out to Cindric for, his performance. I thought he was the dominant car of the weekend and really the one to beat throughout the race as well. Got taken out on that last lap incident, might have had a chance to win. So, not everything with the Fords was each individual driver's fault, but I felt like they just kind of, in the end, just took themselves out of it when I think that they had the best opportunity to win the 500.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Cindric. He really was, for the whole weekend, was probably the performer of the weekend for me.
I agree.
I was kind of, part of me was rooting for him to win the race towards the end there, just because it felt like he really deserved it.
Mm-hmm.
So, we both picked him not to win a race last week in our preview, but I would have happily ate crow with that one with the way he performed this past weekend.
Yeah, I agree. He deserved that one.
Yeah. I agree with you. On the Fords for being a stinker of the week, I really struggled trying to find one this week because there was a lot of teams that, maybe had 1 or 2 guys that struggled, but had another one come in the top 10 or, run really well all day or whatnot. There really wasn't a whole lot of teams that ran poorly. I would say the Fords as well, I guess, for a stinker. And then I would also, this is a little harsh given the circumstances. I wouldn't really say that they ran bad technically, but it was a pretty rough weekend for Trackhouse.
Yeah.
They had Daniel Suarez came in 13th, pretty respectable, especially starting from in the 30s, I believe. But, you have Chastain going out, and then you had SVG ending, I believe, 8 laps down, and then Castroneves as well. It's tough to really put them as a stinker because SVG and Castroneves really don't have any experience on this, kind of track in this car. So you can't really blame Trackhouse too much for it. So it's not really a performance thing. It's just kind of, it was a disappointing weekend for them.
Yeah, well, that's kind of my thought of why I didn't go with Trackhouse, was just because it didn't seem like any of those things that happened were really their fault. I felt like they had pretty good pace throughout the weekend. Suarez was running up in the top 10 for most of the day. SVG and Ross had good speed before they were involved in accidents. The one that took Ross out and SVG, that car, the nose was caved in and everything. So hard for him to stay with the lead pack after that, make up those laps that he was down. And then Helio got taken out in that Ross crash when he got cut underneath by John Hunter Nemechek and sent up right into Helio. So it was a tough weekend for Helio, actually. It seemed like he was in a lot of the accidents. None were really, I feel like, his fault, just kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time for all of them. I thought that the Trackhouse, we'll see. I think that they'll have good speed this year, better than last year, but it was not a good start to their week to their season.
Yeah, I think Trackhouse will be fine. And like I said, I didn't really view it as much of a performance thing. It's just more of a, it's kind of a tough weekend for them. But I think they'll be fine long term. And I also think too, I was really upset that we didn't get to see more of Helio this weekend. Just constantly involved in crashes, and he seemed to be in really good spirits after the race. Seemed like he still wanted to give this another shot, maybe at Daytona, maybe at I think he mentioned doing a road course. I saw a lot of fans online mentioning him maybe doing the Brickyard. Indianapolis would be awesome.
Yeah.
Any of those, I think it would be great to have him back and hopefully give him a more proper run in the car. I know he got a decent amount of laps in throughout the race, and he did pretty well in the ARCA race as well.
Yeah.
So I would love to see him back, but just a tough luck weekend for him.
Yeah, I'd love to see him back too, because I felt like he, at points of the weekend, he seemed like a bit of a laughing stock, and got some flack from the other drivers too, just for, having that exemption. Not really directed at him, more at the exemption, but still he was kind of at the end of a lot of those complaints from the drivers. But I thought that his actual driving was fine. He had a lot of bad luck in those incidents, but when he was on track and in contention, he did pretty well in the ARCA race, and I would like to see him get another try at either this or the Brickyard would be great, because his history there and everything else. So I'd love to see him get behind the wheel again, and I hope he does.
Yeah, and I feel like at least on my end, kind of want to amend my stance a little bit on the driver exemptions. I still think that it's a good thing, like we did before the weekend and everything. But I do think the drivers have a good point when we talk about Helio getting in automatically, but not like a Jimmy Johnson, or even a Martin Truex as well. Those guys obviously have proven over the years that they have the pace to be in the race, given their long history of being NASCAR champions and whatnot. So, I think that, we kind of need to have a look back at that rule. And I like the idea still for drivers coming from other series, at least drivers of Helio status, or multi-time race winners on these other series who've really proven that they're amongst the best in the world. But I also think that it should apply to past NASCAR champions, at least to a degree, if you want to hold it to a few races a year or something, but just so that someone like Jimmy Johnson or Martin Truex doesn't have to qualify for this race.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the only pushback I'll have on what the driver's stance was is that Helio, at the end of the day, that exemption, he wasn't taking away a spot from anyone. It was an added spot to the end. So it's not like he kept one of the guys from the smaller open teams out, or he kept a Jimmy or a Martin Truex out. It was more of an addition rather than taking away anyone else's attempt at the 500. But I do agree, if Helio is going to be in no matter what, that these 500 past 500 champions or past Cup Series champions, if that's how you want to do the exemption. I think that they should be guaranteed entry as well, similar to something like the Masters or something in golf. Past champions automatically in. So I think something like that would be a good addition.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly on the nose there. If they were taking a spot away from, one of the smaller teams, someone who's, kind of based their whole year maybe around making this race, or at least the last few months, I think that would be a mistake. But, they've got room. Obviously, they've ran more than 40 cars many times here before. Yeah. They got plenty of room on that track for, 2 or 3 more cars. And, I think as long as they're not taking spots away and they keep that part of it, I think that that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. Well, moving on to just a couple last things from NASCAR here before we move on. What do you think, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, if anything needs to change on this current super speedway package? I've seen a lot of hate from fans, especially after this 500, and I saw Denny Hamlin talking about it as well on his podcast, that something needs to change here. What do you think about this current super speedway iteration with the next gen car, and do you think that we need to make significant changes like we need with the short track package?
I mean, I think it's a sort of a tough balance there, because I think just given the nature of Daytona, the nature of the high speeds and how close they are together, and the status of this race, the desperation that we're going to see from drivers to win this race, we're always going to see a lot of accidents. I think it certainly seems like it's gone up in recent years, and I'd love to see that go back down a little bit, just, provide a little more balance to the race, I guess, and not have as many end under yellow flag conditions like we have some in the last half decade or so. But I think it's kind of a tough balance. I think something you've talked about is the fuel saving, and how much of a factor that has become, and I agree that that's definitely been a bit of an issue. But other than that, I think it's I think to some degree Daytona is always going to be this way. I think you can make some minor adjustments here and there, but I'm interested to see what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, well, the first thing is that fuel mileage, fuel saving thing. I would love to see that go away. I'm not sure if taking away the stages is how we fix that, or if there's some other way to with the cars or whatever to make that change. But I think that's a big one. Obviously, this is kind of the fastest that these cars are going to go, and then having these guys fuel save for most of it, isn't a great look and not exactly what we want to see from a racing standpoint either. But the other thing, I would love to see them, obviously, and I think a lot of fans will agree, take the restrictor plates off, increase the horsepower a little bit, and just let the cars go. I mean, I know there's obviously that safety element to it, which is very valid, and you saw that a little bit with Ryan Preece and his flip, and if he was going faster, who knows how that might end. But at the end of the day, it's racing, and there's always going to be those safety risks. Obviously, we want to minimize them, but I would love to see them just kind of let it go a little bit and let the cars run. I think that would make for some better racing and more like what we saw in past 500s before the introduction of the restrictor plates and all that. I think that would be a great step in the right direction, but I think the fuel saving is a big part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think thankfully, we've seen such leaps and bounds in safety in the last couple decades that I think that would be more possible to take away restrictor plates and let them loose a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
I still think, maybe they'll try and do some studies on it or something and kind of really evaluate that. But I do like that idea of kind of letting them loose. And I think on the fuel saving, I think there are other series and other times where we look at that, as an achievement, to be able to fuel save and kind of, maintain position. We've talked about some with IndyCar over the years of, guys fuel saving and managing to still win or secure a podium, and that being something that, is, valued, I guess. Yeah. And I do get that. But I agree that Daytona is a little bit different because, like you said, as fast as we're going to see these guys go all year, and we want to see them actually going as fast as they can go, at least, really putting their foot to the pedal or, pedal to the floor and letting it rip. And yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I will say the one thing, and I think that you were touching on there, is seeing fuel saving as an accomplishment. Like, the one that comes to mind is obviously Scott Dixon at IndyCar and all of his crazy wins doing that fuel saving technique. But I think what makes that special is that there's only a few guys that try that in those given races, and it's a difference in strategy of making that work versus running full out. Here, it's just everyone fuel saving and doing the same thing.
Yeah.
If everyone was fuel saving like Dixon, that wouldn't have been as fun to watch as well. In some of his fuel saving victories last year and the years before. So I think that in a situation like this, trying to cut back on that fuel saving, either that or make it to where there are the different strategies. Some can fuel save, some can just go for it. Either one of those I would be great with. But just, not having everyone on the same exact strategy and trying to fuel save, I think is what we need to go towards.
Yeah, and that's a point that I was going to make actually later with Formula E and adding pit stops. I think, as race fans, we love to see the diversity in strategy.
Mm-hmm.
We love to see different guys try different things and see if they can pull it off.
Yeah.
And if the full field is doing the same thing, that really takes away a certain edge to the race.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right on that one. That that's just one of the ways that I'd like to see more. Some more switch ups in strategy and see these guys kind of, just try something different out there, and it might lead to a more. I don't want to say more entertaining because Daytona is always entertaining, but it could spice things up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Last thing here before we move on from NASCAR, I want to talk about Fox and their coverage this weekend, and we're obviously starting off the new NASCAR season. Fox is the one that kicks us off before this year we move on to three other TV companies that'll be broadcasting this season. But the one thing I'll give Fox credit for before we get into it is doing more of the side-by-side instead of full commercials this year. I thought that was great because you're always seeing some of the racing no matter what. Obviously, you want it full screen as much as you can, and there were a lot of those split-screen breaks, but I thought that it was good to see them at least trying to show us some more racing, and I appreciated that part. But I just think the biggest thing, my biggest thing with Fox is I think that it's time for a new booth there and to see something different. I still think Mike Joy has a ton left to give. I think that, obviously he's getting older and he's not going to be as on his game as he was, back when the booth had Larry Mack and those guys. But I think that, Clint, maybe some people like him. He's just not for me, especially if you rewatch the end of that race. I felt like he was kind of yelling over Mike Joy in that, closing calling of Byron's win. And I think that, it just kind of takes away from some of those moments. And I think Harvick might be a little bit better too, if he had someone not Clint that was there to facilitate some more in the booth. And I think that it might help Harvick open up a little bit and also help him dive more into some of the breakdowns of what we're seeing on track. So I would love to see something change there in the booth, and but I do commend them for the decrease, I guess, in commercials this week, or full screen commercials.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to see where they go with the booth in these next few years.
Yeah,
See how long Mike Joy sticks around, and then also, I think there's another crop of drivers now that are getting older, probably about to retire.
Yeah,
and I wonder if they're gonna give any of those guys a shot up in the booth. We've seen so many of them, try their hand, at calling some lower series or some different events, so it's not a foreign concept to any of these guys. But, I've seen a lot of people talking about people like Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano and guys like that potentially finding their way up to the booth. in a full-time capacity after they retire. I think they'll probably keep this booth for a little while longer, but if Fox and NASCAR keep going together, I think there could be some changes on the way in the next few years.
Yeah, I know Logano's done some Xfinity stuff, and Blaney's done some Xfinity stuff. Obviously, he's still more than a few years away from moving to some role like that. But I think both of those guys might be good in the future. Something that Fox should look into. The other thing I'll say is I feel like with IndyCar coming in on Fox, and obviously they're trying to promote that in a new entity that they're broadcasting. I think that you could just tell that there's a little bit of a lack of caring on Fox's side about broadcasting NASCAR. I know we're going to get a ton of IndyCar ads, and I'm glad for IndyCar for that on a separate note. But from a NASCAR perspective, you're going to get a ton of those ads because it's on a new network and they need to let people know where it's at. But you could just tell the lack of NASCAR ads that we've seen coming up to the Daytona 500, the biggest event of the year. You pretty much saw no ads for the Clash in the closing out of the NFL season or anything else that was on Fox. So I just think that there's some level of within Fox a lack of wanting to be there and wanting to broadcast NASCAR at this point. I don't know if that's from being there for however many years they've been there and being a part of the sport, and they're just getting a little tired of that, or what it is. But I just think that they need some big changes to kind of reinvent that broadcast, bring some energy back into it. And I just, if you look at how Fox was back in their heyday, it was the pinnacle of the broadcast industry with at least in NASCAR and motorsports, with all those guys up in the booth. And it's just sad to see, how it is, especially for Mike Joy for being there for so many years. I just feel like it's kind of like a disgrace to his legacy at this point, what Fox has kind of become.
Yeah, it's been kind of tough ever since, we lost Darrell Waltrip up there in the booth.
Yeah.
And like you said, Larry McReynolds has kind of switched roles,
Yeah.
on the broadcast. It's been tough finding guys to replace them.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure they are replaceable in a way because they're so good at what they did.
Yeah, they brought so much energy, and that's what I loved. Obviously, everyone has a different personality, but I just want someone to kind of bring that energy and make it feel genuine. They felt so genuine when they were doing it. And sometimes it's like, I feel like Clint doesn't always have that genuine feel to it. It seems like he's just trying a little bit too hard to be a commentator, I think. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to see some guys with some like real genuine feeling, excitement and just enthusiasm when these races end in dramatic fashion.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And I agree with you that, the call this past weekend, we were at the track when it happened, but watching it back on replay, Clint was almost like, you talk about enthusiasm. I mean, he was almost over the top there. Like,
it's like he was trying to kind of take Mike's role there and calling the end of the race, and it just felt kind of chopped up and it didn't flow very well. So
yeah, I agree with you on that. I think, I wanted to talk too about your IndyCar point. Mm-hmm. That was something I debated bringing up on the last podcast when we were talking about our predictions for the year, Fox's future with NASCAR, and then kind of, potentially prepping IndyCar and to replace it kind of as their main motorsports coverage. If they do end up losing the NASCAR rights, I think, they're going to promote IndyCar so heavily because they have full rights to it, whereas with NASCAR, they're kind of splitting it, with some other entities and whatnot. Now they have to split it with Amazon as well. Mm-hmm. I think they've done a great job promoting IndyCar, which I'm sure we'll get more to when the IndyCar season starts. And I know there's been a lot of NASCAR fans unhappy with that, with their seeming. They have done promotion for the 500 and for the season, but the IndyCar ads just seem to be on another level. Yeah. So I do wonder, if that's kind of what's going on, if Fox is kind of prepping for a future without NASCAR potentially and having IndyCar replace it.
That's the feeling that I've had ever since they started putting out these IndyCar ads and really digging into that IndyCar side. And I was nervous for IndyCar because of how Fox has trended with NASCAR the past few years, but it seems like, and I'll wait until we get to the real broadcasts and everything, but it seems like they're very interested in promoting it and making it a great product. So I'm very excited for IndyCar in that sense, and when IndyCar comes on, I'll be very happy. But if for NASCAR, it does kind of suck a little bit.
Yeah, they seem to have gotten some real commitment. IndyCar has from Fox. I mean, getting multiple prime spots during the Super Bowl was really kind of a big example of that. Even though they start a few weeks after NASCAR does, they seem to have gotten a lot of the prime airtime. People trying to get them familiar with IndyCar and get them excited that it's coming to their network. So I think they've knocked it out of the park with IndyCar, but then you also have to compare that to NASCAR and kind of might leave a bad feeling in some NASCAR fans, Yeah.
Well, let's finish up NASCAR here with a quick NASCAR fantasy update after week 1, race 1. Currently, I lead 28-12 after the first race. I think Byron and Reddick really, finishing 1-2 really made the difference there. 17 added points for me just from those two alone. So it's very early in this, and looking at the points already, there's going to be a ton of points throughout the season on offer. So not anything big, but just a week 1 update.
Yeah, maybe I should have gone all in on Legacy Motor Club. I should have picked Jimmy Johnson with one of my first picks up there. But
I don't think that would have paid dividends later on in the season. But
No, I just bank a few points at the start.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's move on to Formula E in Saudi Arabia. There was a double race weekend there, double hitter. Max Gunter won race 1, made a great final lap pass around Oliver Rowland to pick up his first win of the season. And then Oliver Rowland won that second race for Nissan, the second one of the season for Rowland. And a great weekend for him, vault him up to the first place in the standings now, overtaking DaCosta, who went into the race weekend with the lead. He has a 17-point advantage now in first place. I just thought it was a great weekend for Rowland, especially. Obviously, Gunter, a great pass and great win in that first race. Not his best race in the second one, but still, I think Rowland is kind of the big takeaway of the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, his last 3 races, he's P1, P2, and P1. I mean, that's pretty much as good as you can get. He was especially dominant in race 2. He was, you saw all the guys fighting for the rest of the podium spots, a couple turns behind him back there was he was crossing the finish line.
Yeah.
I mean, you really don't see a lot of that. In Formula E, you see a lot of close finishes, especially compared to, Formula 1 or whatnot. But, he had a really special weekend, and I think, it's a lot to ask to keep up that form for a whole season, but I could certainly see him as one of the 2 or 3 title favorites after this.
Yeah, he just seems very in tune with everything right now, and I would put him as the favorite just because of how he started off the year. And I just think, he might have had 3 wins in a row, honestly, if he saves a little bit more energy there. In the first race of the weekend and is able to, defend Gunter's attack on that final lap. He's really 1 corner away from 3 straight wins, and I think to start off the season with form like that is a great sign for him and for Nissan as well as we look ahead into the rest of the season.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited. We're going to talk a little bit about Porsche later and some of their struggles, but I think this is really setting up to be a really fantastic fight for, I guess they call it the team championship instead of the constructors. But we've got 4 teams here within 5 points of each other so far in the team standings, and I think for Porsche to still be in that position, they're third. After a weekend like that's still a good sign, but I think we're in for a great title fight potentially this year.
Yeah, who are the 4 teams that are up there battling for that team spot? Because I didn't get to I didn't check that after the race, but I figured it was a lot closer now that Porsche had such a bad weekend.
Yeah, so right now we've got Nissan at the top on 68 points, and McLaren 1 point behind on 67.
Wow.
And then we've got Porsche at 64 and DS Penske at 63.
Okay.
So,
really,
I think it could go down to the wire here. I mean, I know the next guy we're going to talk about is a McLaren driver who really had a fantastic weekend this year too.
Yeah,
this past weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, the other guy I wanted to talk about, who was kind of a story of the weekend, was Taylor Barnard for McLaren. He finished the weekend with 2 podiums, third place in the first race, and then held on for a second place in that second race and 1 pole for that race as well. He now sits second in the championship, 3 podium finishes on the season. For such a young guy, I think he's going to be the big star, the rising star out of Formula E for the next few years, depending on if he gets offers to go elsewhere, or if he wants to do that, or if he'd rather stay in Formula E. I think he would have an incredible career. He seems like a great talent very early on in his career, and he's already stacking up podiums. A win, and I think it's right around the corner at this point for him, and kind of elevating McLaren as well in Formula E, where they haven't had terrible success, but they also haven't had the best success yet either in that series. So I think McLaren has a great one with Barnard, and I'm really excited to see what he has in store going forward.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to use the phrase breakout star. He feels like the it came out of nowhere a little bit. Got a few starts last year in Formula E, but really wasn't able to do much with it. Mm-hmm. And then had some F2 experience as well. But again, not one of those breakout prospects that we see. Not somebody that was on my radar, honestly, as much going into this year. But he's been phenomenal so far this season for McLaren, and I think I'd be really excited and interested to see them make a run. Obviously, wearing a McLaren sweatshirt today, but I'd love to see them make a little bit of a run here. After winning in Formula One constructors title last year, to potentially, if they could do the same in Formula E, I think that would be really a heck of an achievement.
Yeah, I think the thing I'm seeing out of Barnard mostly that excites me is the racecraft. You see it out there. He's not afraid to make some big moves in defense or in attack. He seems like kind of a fearless driver, to be honest, and I really love watching that. That's kind of a thing that pulls me to a driver, is how fearless they seem out there, and he definitely seems like he has that trait. So I'm really excited to watch him moving forward, and I hope that he keeps up that style of racecraft, and I think if he does, a win is right around the corner for him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like we said before, with Rowland, it's tough to keep up that form for the whole year.
Yeah.
With 3 podiums and 4 races here, but I really think he's going to end up being one of our top drivers this year, and I agree he's going to get that win eventually.
Yeah, well, on the other end of the spectrum, and you mentioned it a little bit already, Porsche had a very poor weekend. Definitely not the one we were expecting. We both had them winning both of the races when we predicted it last week, and that was not the case at all. Their best finish of the weekend was Verline's P8 in race 2. DaCosta had a P9 in race 1 as well, and then the other races for DaCosta and Verline were not in the points. So I think it was not the weekend that they were expecting or hoping for. It seemed like they were, the ones to beat just on pace. They hadn't quite got a win yet this year, but they, were the ones that everyone was looking at. And now, after this weekend, A, it didn't seem like they had much pace, and B, they weren't able to capitalize on any moments that they did have. So I think it's, concerning for Porsche this weekend. I wouldn't go full in freak out mode yet if, you were a Porsche fan out there. Just off of one weekend, but if they don't figure it out next weekend and things look like they continue in this direction, I think it's something that I would begin to be concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a disastrous weekend for them, unfortunately. We both really liked them going into the weekend, like you said, and it was kind of tough to tell on this Jeddah circuit, how things were going to play out. We hadn't seen Formula E on this circuit before. But yeah, they just did not have the pace this weekend.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they'll make a comeback in these next couple races. They're not going to be down for long, but they're really kind of the, I guess we weren't doing an official stinker of the week for Formula E, but that definitely would be the one for.
Yeah, I agree. It'd have to be Porsche, and I think my top performer for the week would be Rowland, but Barnard would be right there as well, and we just touched on those guys. So, I think the last thing here with Formula E is, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, the introduction of those pit stops into the race in race 1 there. I think it was a great thing for the sport. I thought it was, pit stops is something that I've been looking for in Formula E to, you don't have to have pit stops for it to be like real racing, but I think it kind of makes it closer to those other series like Formula One or IndyCar or whatever they're, closest to. So I think it was a great addition. I thought it really played well and introduced some strategy options as well. So I'd like to, get your thoughts on it since you were brought it up a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think, I wanted to fold this in a little bit with also the use of the circuit in Jeddah. Those two things, one, having the pit stops and, adding a bit more strategy to the race, and then two, having the race, it doesn't have to be Formula One tracks. It could be other high level tracks around the world. But, even though it's kind of a street track, it's really more of, a set track for Formula One, in the same way that Mexico City's is, and some others as well. But my point is, I think this goes really a long way. I don't know if legitimizing the series is the right word, because the drivers and the people who construct the cars are obviously extremely skilled in Formula E. So it's not like it was illegitimate before, but this certainly, just as someone who's relatively new to the series, this helps me. It helps to kind of compare it more closely to the other series that we follow. And I think it's great that there's some uniqueness in Formula E, and that there are some things other than the cars being electric that set it apart from the other series. But I think, it's sometimes, at least from what I've seen so far, just with some of the track design and some of the different ways they change the race, sometimes it can feel a little gimmicky. Yeah. And I think these are both positive changes in the right direction, towards building a series that's still unique, but it feels more, I guess, professional in a way that the other series are.
Yeah, I completely get that, and that's kind of been why I've been so excited about them adding the pit stops, is it does give it that sense of, you tune in and it might be your first time, and it feels more like these other series that we watch. And obviously you want to be different somehow to the others. NASCAR is different than F1, and IndyCar is different than NASCAR and F1, and they're all different in their own ways. And that's a great thing, but some overlap of, familiarity is a great thing, I think, as well. And adding these pit stops gives it that. But I think also from a real racing perspective, it's great because it adds that, it adds another layer of strategy. And then another thing that I would love to see is introducing some tires with some more wear, so that's another part of the pit stop sequence as well, or even not using different tires, or pitting and staying on the same, or going to different, or whatever. I just think anything that introduces strategy is a great thing for to watching a race. I think that would go a long way. I think also maybe instead of having attack mode be that big loop around the corner, it's something be more like a push-to-pass system in IndyCar, where you get the allotted amount and then you can use it at any point throughout the race. Because I think that adds strategy as well, and puts it more in the driver's hands on, okay, I'm going to push now, or I'm going to hold back now. I think it gives it, it's more for the drivers than the current iteration. That being said, I think it's great that there's all of these differences from Formula E compared to other series, but I just think a couple changes here and there, and it would become something even bigger than it is now, and that would be a great thing.
Yeah, and I'm with you fully on the attack mode, and and ways we can change that. I think that would go a long way as well towards improving. I think the idea of the attack mode is great.
Yeah,
and managing your time properly, and also like we have with battery charge, managing that as well. I think those are great because it adds strategy. It adds a level of difficulty for these drivers who are among the best in the world.
Yeah.
We want to see things like that. But I agree. I think changing it to more of a push to pass kind of thing,
Yeah.
I think would be much more efficient and would just work better for the drivers.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I hope that's something that they at least look at, or they, think about making some small changes. I don't want them to overhaul the whole series because I do like the racing. I feel like there's some great moments and some great excitement. So I hope that they don't go too far away from what they've done and what they've created here. But I think a couple slight tweaks might help just really take the series to another level. So I hope that's something that they might consider in the future. Let's move on to just a couple F1 news, just little news notes before we wrap up here. But something I saw was, some rumors of ESPN leaving their F1 broadcasting partnership with F1 after the 2025 season. Nothing official that I saw yet, at least, but it's something that would definitely affect the American market, the one that we're in. And I've also heard rumors that Netflix might be after that F1 broadcasting rights as well. So kind of, pairing those two together, I think that it's a shame because I think ESPN has had great success broadcasting F1 to the Americas. And I think that it's gotten a lot of people interested in the racing over here. But we'll see what comes from it, and if Netflix might be better for the series, then I'm all for it. If going somewhere else is better for the series, I'm all for that too. So I just at the end of the day, I just want it to be a good broadcasting partner and a partnership that works and really advertises the series well over here.
Yeah, I would say personally, when it comes to sports media rights in general, I'm pretty skeptical of these streaming services getting involved.
Yeah.
Just because not everyone has every streaming service. A lot of the, some of the older generations, still only have basic cable or, only have, your network channels or whatnot. And I think that if you're trying to reach as many people as possible, I think going through someone like ESPN, where you can put a few races a year on ABC and you can put the rest on ESPN, which a lot of people get, I think would be the right way to go. But I will say, I think in this specific instance, if they play their cards right, I think Netflix could be a good option for Formula One, just because as a streaming service, as far as those go, that's about as big as it's going to get. I would have a lot more subscribers than most of your other streaming services, and most importantly, they already have the Drive to Survive series built in. So a lot of the recent popularity surge in the U.S. has come from that.
Yeah.
So these people, you imagine most of them already have Netflix. You bring them in. The only thing I would add to that is a lot of the, now with ESPN, you can watch all the practices, all qualifying, all that. I would hope that, Netflix would carry everything on their platform, all the practices, the qualifying, sprint races, all of that, which I would imagine they would, but, you never know. That's a lot of their sporting events that they've done so far have been, either one-off events or like a once-a-week thing, like your WWE events and whatnot that they've gotten into now. Whereas F1, it's whole weekends at a time, multiple things a day or a full-length feature race. I would hope that you'd be able to watch an entire weekend worth of F1 content on there and not just a feature race. But I think if they do it the right way, I think Netflix could be a worthwhile partner. They may not be the number one partner for continuing to expand their audience in the U.S., but I still think, depending on the financials of it, that they could that it could be a good option for both sides.
Yeah, I think that you hit a lot of good points there, and that I do worry to an extent about Netflix or any streaming service because of some of these streaming platforms are a little untested with sports. I know Netflix is getting into that side of things. The Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight was on there. They've had some other smaller events on there, and then like you mentioned with WWE going on there as a weekly thing. There were some bad moments from the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight on there with streaming and it going down and being slow or lagging. That does worry me. Obviously, a lot of people were tuned in at one time for that, so you probably won't get that many people tuning in for an F1 race or free practice one or whatever. But I also haven't heard anything bad from, and I'm not super tuned in with the WWE week-to-week community, but I haven't heard anything too bad from that yet, that there's been issues with Netflix. So that does give me hope, and that things are getting worked out there with their live sports side of things. And if they can make it work, I think it has a great opportunity, like you mentioned, because Drive to Survive is already on there, and a lot of people do, at least in America, kind of associate Netflix with F1. So I think that would be kind of just easy to switch over, and hey, you just watch Drive to Survive. Here's the races and the schedule coming up, and we have one in the next week or two or whatever. I think that's a great thing, and that could be huge for the sport. So I'd be I guess I'm cautiously optimistic about if Netflix gets involved, because I see some great sides and some great avenues that it could go, but also I've seen some not so great Netflix live sports events be broadcasted on there already.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the server issues and connection issues with events like the Paul Tyson fight. I don't think that would be an issue in this instance, just because any F1 race, honestly, it'll get a big audience in the U.S., but it won't have nearly the surge I think that specific instance had, or the NFL game that they carried over Christmas. I don't think we would have the same kind of thing happen here. I think Netflix would be able to handle it, and I think if they do things the right way, I think it could be a really good partner for F1. But we'll see how that pans out if they go that route.
Yeah, I agree. I hope it works out, or whichever way F1 and their broadcasting partner for the U.S. decides to go. I'd love to see the product continue to be broadcast in a good way, and hopefully to even add more fans over here than we already have. The last thing for F1 here, the F1 75 all 10 car and team reveal and everything is actually going on right now. Not too much to add because we're haven't seen any of it yet, but just wanted to, I guess, get your thoughts on F1 doing their reveals this way compared to everyone revealing at their own times, and I guess what exactly you see this, if it continues to be something for the coming years, or if it's just a kind of a one-off thing for the 75 anniversary.
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as it goes well, I could see it becoming a long-term thing, because I think it will, bring in revenue for the series, people watching and people attending the event and whatnot. It's going to be a revenue driver for them. For me personally, I'm kind of curious. Like you said, we haven't really seen any of it, even though it's kind of already starting up. But I'm curious to see what it's going to offer. I think it could be great for the teams and for F1 as a whole to kind of build some hype going into the season. Having everyone there at once, unveiling all the cars at once, I think could bring a lot of excitement and entertainment value there. But I do wonder, if all it is just the livery reveals, and then some kind of surface level questions, I guess, your basic interview questions, then it's cool, but it's not really something that moves the needle too much for me. I'll look on social media and see what the designs are, but other than that, even the livery designs may not be fully final with sponsor changes or whatnot. So that's kind of where I'm at. Is I think if they do this the right way, I think it can be a great way to build up hype for the series for the next season. I just hope that it's more than just here's the car and we ask the drivers a couple basic questions and that's all. So I'm just hoping for more.
Yeah, that's what I expect it to be. I'm honestly don't have too many. I haven't looked into the event too much and exactly what they're doing, but it'd be really cool if they had some fun moments in there as well that would catch my attention and bring me in more as a viewer. I mean, they may be doing this and I just don't even know about it, but it'd be really cool to see them do like a sim race or something with all the drivers while they're all already there, or some like a go-kart race or something that would just just let us see the drivers obviously competing in a different setting, but still competing, and also just I feel like we'd get a lot of fun moments of banter back and forth with these guys in events like a little sim race or a little go-kart race or something. I think would be a lot of fun, and we'd get a lot of great moments from that. So I think maybe adding something like that would be great for viewership and tuning into an event like that, and just adding more than just the reveal and here's the car, and like you said, just a couple questions about the season, a couple softballs, and that's it.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't even think it has to be, guys out there driving cars or anything, or even on a sim. It could be, like some grill the grid kind of stuff. Like, just having some fun with the drivers and kind of, letting the people in. I know they do that with Drive to Survive, and they've done it very well. But, that's a little bit different producing a show like that versus a live show. I don't know if you get all of the drivers to, want to do like, some of the activities, but you could have a couple of them do this and a couple of them do that, something to, bring a little more entertainment value to the evening than just showing us the cars.
Yeah, I agree. I hope that's, if this event keeps going, that's something that it evolves into, and well, I guess we'll go check it out and see what's happening over there. And then we'll probably be able to dive in more next week on it, and probably give more of a full F1 season preview coming up here soon, and an IndyCar season preview as well, as both of those are getting underway soon. But I think that's pretty much everything for today. It touched on a lot with the Daytona all the way to Formula E and Jeddah. So, I think that's pretty much everything that we have for this episode.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I'm sure we'll do some F1 and IndyCar preview content soon, and then, next week we'll be able to talk about this F1 event and the NASCAR race at Atlanta, and any other news we might have. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Well, that wraps up everything for today. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. See you next time.